Hey everyone, so this is a topic that's gotten quite a bit of traction lately, and considering how I made a video relating to it pretty recently, I figured it was only appropriate that I put in my 2 cents. Recently, the Actman put out a video titled The Rise and Fall of Arena Shooters, and it's not really good. Now if you don't know already, Actman is a creator known for making a ton of video essays about a number of games, but mainly focusing on Halo and Call of Duty. And they're really good. I've actually been watching him for a few years now, and I do enjoy his content for the most part. But this last video was not only just horribly unfocused, but also confusing and downright inaccurate in a number of places, and it's just really frustrating to someone like myself who is thoroughly familiar with the genre of arena shooters. Now don't worry, this isn't a hate video. I'm not just gonna sit here and yell after every sentence and call him a dumbass or whatever. There's been more than enough unnecessary shit-flinging from both sides of this discussion. This is just me trying to fairly critique his treatment of a subject that I really do hold close to heart, since he has done better before, but this just isn't it. Now, I'm not going to focus on absolutely everything everyone's been criticizing, such as weird B-roll choices, since honestly, while it is a bit annoying, I think it's really irrelevant to the overall points he's made in the video, which is what I want to focus on at the end of the day. Also, this is going to be a bit of a more unscripted sort of video, since I really just want to get my thoughts out here regarding this subject, so if I sound less professional or stumble or repeat myself a lot, I do apologize in advance. Now, before we begin proper, I think we need to explain the difference between what is an arena shooter and a movement shooter, since while the video does focus on arena shooters, I think it really gets mixed up with movement shooters quite a bit. Now, for me, in order for an arena shooter to qualify as such, it needs to focus on these 4 traits. Everyone starting off exactly equally with the same weapons and traits themselves, no weapon limit, a pure focus on multiplayer, and an emphasis on movement. That last part seems to trip up people quite a bit, since both in this video and even in some of the comments regarding the discourse to it, I saw a lot of people confusing other games that don't have the first 2 parts as arena shooters. Let's go deeper and compare. Quake 3. That game has all these traits, and as such is qualified as an arena shooter. Hell, it has arena in the name. I'm 90% sure actually that arena shooters are called arena shooters because of Quake 3. Now a game like, say, TF2 on the other hand, is not an arena shooter, but it does have arena shooter DNA within it. While everyone starts with their own separate loadouts and have an overall role in the team and how matches play out, not only are all the weapons and how they work very reminiscent of arena shooter counterparts, but there is a big emphasis on movement and positioning. To put it simply, not all movement shooters are arena shooters, but all arena shooters are movement shooters, which is where I think a lot of this confusion tends to come from. And I think that's honestly a good place to start, since really, there was obviously some confusion before the video even came out, and this is really where all the discourse kind of started. About a week before he put the video out, he put the thumbnail on Twitter as a preview, with some confusing choices for characters in the thumbnail for a video about arena shooters. Now already you have the Doom Marine, which, you know what, makes sense. You know, Doom is known more for its single player than its multiplayer, but Doom invented deathmatch as we know it, so it is definitely worth mentioning, I would say. You know, we could go into more specifics about the use of Eternal Doom Guy and how that game didn't have deathmatch, but you know what, whatever. But where it really gets weird are the 2 other characters he ends up using. To represent arena shooters, what would you think you would use? You know, Quake, Unreal? Nope. Instead we have Duke Nukem and Gordon Freeman. 2 games that are very much more known for its single player than its multiplayer, and despite having deathmatch in them, weren't really known as arena shooters due to its lack of focus on multiplayer. Now even still, when confronted, he still could have said that Half-Life and Duke 3D had arena-styled multiplayer modes, but when asked, he instead brings up Deathmatch Classic, which isn't a Half-Life game. It is a standalone multiplayer game made on Gold Source engine, and it's quite literally just Quake 1 multiplayer, but in Gold Source. And if that isn't a sign of just how confusing this video is already set to turn out to be, then I don't know what is. But without further ado, let's actually get started and dive deep into this.
Like I said, Wolfenstein 3D put FPS on the map, and in 1993, Doom solidified its position. as a legitimate contender.
Now this is the first real issue with pretty much a majority of the video, is that it really doesn't focus purely on arena shooters, but more so just shooters in general. It feels a lot more like a sort of history evolution of video, and as we'll see later, there is a lot wrong with it, a lot just of purely inaccurate information. Again, I understand the focus on Doom because Doom invented deathmatch as we know it, but why do we even need to talk about Wolfenstein 3D? Like, it's an important game, don't get me wrong, but in terms of arena shooters, not so much. It would make a lot more sense in my mind if we started out just with Doom and the introduction of network play in that, and then immediately talk about maybe briefly some of the other games that did it, like Duke 3D and whatnot, and then go to Quake, which is where, you know, obviously it really started to take off.
A couple months after Doom 2, one company managed to earn a piece of the FPS pie. Sup, fellas? My name's Bungie, and I feel like running a marathon.
Again, I just don't understand the large focus on the Doom clone era period, since, again, a lot of these games' multiplayer components, while yes, they did exist, but they weren't exactly as big compared to the single-player components. Quake was definitely really like the first point in time where its multiplayer really started to overcome its single-player, and the subsequent entries in the series would reflect that.
And then in 1995, George Lucas was sitting there like, you know, before I ruin the next trilogy of Star Wars films, I want to usher in the golden age of Star Wars video games. Bam! Star Wars Dark Forces comes out, the first official FPS game for Star Wars. Though it was called a Doom clone, before this, people had been making fan mods of Doom with levels based on the Death Star, and Star Wars had such a rabid, wide audience that when they heard of a computer game where you could shoot stormtroopers in first person, it drew a whole new crowd to arena shooters.
Again, I just don't understand this selection of game here, because again, Dark Forces was important into sort of breaking out the whole Doom clone connotation, but it didn't have multiplayer. It really doesn't make sense to say it brought people to arena shooters when it was purely a single player game. Just talking about this stuff really just feels like wasted time and just padding to get to the part where the actual arena shooters do come in, for as little time as they do spend, as you'll probably see later.
But one of the most important changes Dark Forces introduced was this radical new concept to FPS. Looking up and down. We all start somewhere, right?
This is more of a nitpick, I'm aware, but Marathon actually was the first game with free look, not Dark Forces, which is kind of weird considering, again, we just talked about Marathon like a few minutes ago, but you know what, whatever.
Duke Nukem 3D was the first, truly successful Doom clone, and 3D Realms succeeded with this game largely because of its change in style. Instead of this futuristic or sci-fi setting or killing demons, it was set in more modern times where you're fighting like alien pigs and stuff. It also added elements of comedy and satire to a genre that was primarily focused on murdering everything in front of you.
Again, I find it really interesting how we are focusing pretty much this whole section purely on Duke 3D's single player instead of, you know, its actual multiplayer, which is the closest thing to an arena shooter it has.
More importantly, he introduced the idea that the player could be more than a mindless, silent killing machine.
Again, what does this factor have to do with arena shooters? Yes, Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament had characters that spoke, although in Quake 3 it was more just grunts and random noises. But again, I just don't see what this has to do with arena shooters and them growing over time.
Quake fundamentally changed online first-person shooters in more ways than one. For starters, the process of finding and joining matches was much easier and accessible. So the advancements it made were just out of this world. Just like the ability to look up and down, a fully rendered 3D FPS multiplayer title was a massive revolution for the time. Quake would later spawn its own convention and popularize the art of speedrunning with the website Quake Done Quick. One could also argue that Quake was responsible for the birth of esports.
Now, it's worth keeping in mind that this is the only time he mentions Quake or the Quake series in any kind of full-length detail in this video, which is kind of a big deal, because yes, while multiplayer did indeed overtake the single player with Quake, I really feel that didn't start until Quake 2 at the earliest. Yes, yes, things like Red Annihilation and all the other esports stuff is very important, and it's definitely the groundwork being laid out, but again, I really don't feel that multiplayer started to really kick off until Quake 2, and especially Quake 3. This whole section just feels really rushed through, and is really skipping over all the advancements that the sequels would make in the series, especially for, again, arena multiplayer.
So console FPS titles were never considered a legitimate threat. That is, until a certain secret agent made his debut in the 3D world of gaming.
Again, this is just not a good game to bring up when discussing this topic. Not only was GoldenEye definitely more known for its single player, but it didn't even have multiplayer like other PC games or even future console games would have. Again, GoldenEye was very important in bringing the FPS genre to console and making it more accessible to people, but as an arena shooter, not so much. Both the lack of jumping and just the way that game aims period really does not make it an arena shooter at all, even if it does have some similar qualities like the lack of a weapon limit. It's just too simple even compared to something like Doom or Quake. And again, it wasn't even completely trying to directly compete with actual arena shooters, so I don't understand why we're discussing this.
But before that would happen, id Software saw the success of GoldenEye and was like, oh yeah, Rare, well played, but we can do that too. Yo, Midway, go make Doom 64 for the kiddies.
This section is just factually incorrect. The idea that GoldenEye at all influenced Doom 64's development makes zero sense because Doom 64 actually came out just 5 months before GoldenEye did. And again, you can argue that GoldenEye made shooters work better on console than Doom 64 did. I mean, at least GoldenEye wasn't pitch black and you could actually see what you were doing, unlike in Doom 64. But it's just factually incorrect to say that GoldenEye affected its existence in any way when it came out before GoldenEye did.
But 1998 was a year of innovation for shooters in general, and several new subgenres started to pop up. Metal Gear Solid emphasized stealth and discouraged combat. Rainbow Six was set in a more modern, realistic setting and brought a tactical, cooperative aspect to shooting games. Star Siege Tribes, a game I never heard of prior to this, was notable for introducing massive multiplayer matches with 32v32 lobbies. Arena shooters were still the king in terms of multiplayer, but these other titles represented a growing change in taste. Gamers were starting to experience something different, and they wanted more, and Valve provided more with Half-Life.
Oh boy, there is a lot to dissect here. Not only did these games have zero impact on Half-Life's development or direction at all, but these games came out way too close to Half-Life's release date to even make an impact on it. Half-Life started its development all the way back in 1996 and would finally release in November of 1998. And it's pretty widely known at this point that the game went through so many iterations and changes, and that by the halfway point of its development, an entire build of the game was completely scrapped and they started from scratch. Half-Life, as we know it today, took pretty much 17 months to make, not including all the research and concepts they had beforehand. But just how close to shipping are we talking here? Let's go into more detail. Metal Gear Solid. I mean, first off, why are we even talking about this game? This isn't even a shooter. But even still, it came out just 2 months before Half-Life. Way too close to make any kind of impact. Rainbow Six came out 3 months before Half-Life. And you guys aren't ready for this one. Stargate Tribes came out 1 month after Half-Life. Yes, this game technically didn't even exist before Half-Life. I can't believe these developers somehow went back in time to release a game in the future, but then somehow release it in the past so that it influences Half-Life, I guess. And I don't get either why these are the games chosen especially, because Valve has been upfront on what did influence Half-Life. Doom and Quake were the biggest gameplay influences, alongside Stephen King's The Mist novel in terms of its story direction, and desire to not build a story around a game, but to build a game around a story.
Now, prior to Half-Life, arena shooters had competent, fun single players. Half-Life evolved in a way that few arena shooters ever would after this point. Many developers underestimated the importance of world building, storytelling, atmosphere, and cutscenes. Half-Life managed to evolve the single player side of FPS while also putting its own spin on the arena shooter format. If games like Quake and Unreal had emphasized their single player the way Doom did, maybe they'd still be relevant today. That's what I'm saying.
Yet again, why do we still keep misinterpreting arena FPSs for single-player games? And even then, what spin did Half-Life's deathmatch bring to the arena shooter formula? Not much, honestly. Really, Half-Life's multiplayer would only serve as the foundation that other titles like Counter-Strike and Team Fortress Classic would build upon.
Quake had taken the gaming world by storm, and with the prevalence of modding, many others were keen on taking the genre to greater heights. And what better way to try and dethrone Quake than with a mod made from it? Team Fortress Classic was an incredible turning point in the industry. Developed as a mod for Quake, Valve saw the potential in this experimental shooter and did something many didn't expect. They hired the creators of the mod to work on it as a full-fledged title.
You already mentioned that it was started as a mod for Quake, so when was Team Fortress Classic ever made with the intent to dethrone Quake? That doesn't make any sense. And even then, save for its sequel, I can't think of a time that Team Fortress Classic ever outgrew Quake or Unreal in terms of its popularity. It was still popular, sure, but that was all drops in the bucket compared to what its sequel would eventually do.
This introduced the idea of classes and heroes and preset loadouts as opposed to even starts and everything being on the map. But a hero shooter wasn't the only new kid on the block the likes of Quake and Doom had to compete with.
I know this is more of a nitpick, but it really hurts my soul deep down to hear him call Team Fortress a hero shooter, and I don't mean that in a way of, oh, Overwatch is so bad and TF2 is so much better or anything like that. No. It's not like that at all. But for me, I always saw hero shooters as more preset characters with their own kits that go into a specific role, whereas in TF2, every class has their own specific role. And even if you can boil all them down to just offensive, defensive, and support, they still all have their own niches and everything, their own specific role to carry in with the team, especially when you take into mind all the different unlockable weapons and whatnot, and different playstyles that can come out from that. Like, even for support, obviously Medic can heal the most, NG can only heal just a little bit with dispensers, and Spy doesn't really heal at all. He's literally just pure infiltration and taking out the most high priority targets on the opposing team. The way hero shooters are designed today, like Overwatch, just aren't designed the way TF2 is, and if you ask me, that makes it a league of its own when it comes to its own design.
But while most shooters around this era were either set in the future or more modern times, one game series came along to take us back to the past: Medal of Honor.
Yet again, why are we focusing on games that just do not fit this genre at all and are more known for single player than their multiplayer, even if Medal of Honor 1 had multiplayer? I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but again, there's like no point to talk about Medal of Honor at all right here when talking about pure arena shooters. Now, the popularity of Call of Duty, and especially COD 4, that is definitely worth mentioning, and I think the oversaturation in that type of genre did help make arena shooters kind of fall less into favor over time, but again, that's one of the rare cases where, like Quake, its multiplayer would overthrow its single player in popularity.
2004 is the year that arena shooters started to fall, and the success of games like Halo 2, Call of Duty, and many others were only partially to blame.
Now, ignoring the fact that just a few minutes ago that you said 2001 was the year that the arena shooter started to fall.
But the earth began to crumble, and in 2001, the fall of arena shooters was firmly set in motion, and it couldn't be stopped.
Why aren't we mentioning Unreal 2004 at all here? That's still one of, if not the most popular entry in the series, and did really well at the time, and is still considered to be one of the best multiplayer games of all time, even to this day. Even if things really were starting to die out around that time, it's worth mentioning that it wasn't completely over yet, and Unreal was one of the key players in that.
Doom, not content with becoming irrelevant and being unable to live up to a legacy of changing video games forever, instead opted to change directions completely. With Doom 3, id Software decided to pursue a more story-driven action horror kind of game, drifting from its roots, but still receiving critical acclaim.
This is just getting tiring at this point. Are arena shooters single player or multiplayer? Yes, again, Doom 3 had multiplayer, but nobody remembers Doom 3's multiplayer. People remember the campaign and the expansions when it comes to Doom 3.
FPS titles were a lot more social and team-oriented now. Halo had vehicles. If you think about even the most hardcore fighting games, a casual can pick up a controller, mash buttons, and sometimes win. The skill gap in arena shooters is just too polarizing for casual players to enjoy without becoming a hardcore player themselves.
This is something I'm going to go in more detail on as we approach some later sections of the video, but this is just incorrect. You don't need to be a master or learn all this stuff to do good at an arena shooter. If mashing buttons is all you need in a fighting game, then really all you need to do to succeed in an arena shooter is to keep moving, have good aim, and manage your resources properly. Just look at my gameplay. I've only played maybe 700 hours combining this and Quake Live, but I am not the best Quake player. I die a lot, sometimes I just don't have good aim, and sometimes on certain maps I don't know the locations of things. But that's okay. Sucking is a part of the experience, and it's how you get better over time. If anyone can mash buttons and win at Street Fighter or Guilty Gear, then all you need is to hold W, A, S, or D, and make sure your aim is on point.
But at the same time, you might be thinking, well, Act-Man, companies like id Software and Valve were still doing really well. Why couldn't they revive arena shooters? Well, id Software and Valve sat in similar positions after the success of Doom 3 and Half-Life 2. They had too much dignity to milk their franchises and create anything less than a stellar, revolutionary new entry. And so both franchises went dormant for years.
This statement just shows a complete lacking of each company's respective history. id and Valve were not in the same place at all after Doom 3 and Half-Life 2. Doom 3 really marked the beginning of id Software's dark age that would last through to the development and release of Rage. And yes, technically this all started back when Quake came out and Romero left the company, but Doom 3 really cemented the sort of place that id Software was at that time and their creative output. Without someone to truly focus on the gameplay and fun factor of a game like Romero did, id felt more like a company that made tech demos. Both Romero and Carmack were ingredients to the success of Doom and Quake, and after he and other id alumni left, the company was just never the same. And combine this with the sudden buyout from Bethesda, it really was an uncertain point in time for the company. In contrast, 2004 was more the beginning of Valve's golden age. Even if they weren't direct sequels, Valve still kept making lots of games. I mean, already you had the Half-Life episodes, but then you had the Portal games, TF2, Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, CS Source and CSGO. Especially compared to Valve's output, it was just seen as the out-of-touch old man that didn't understand games anymore. Valve had completely stole the limelight from them and were reveling in the success. Even if Doom 3 still sold really well, people still paid more attention to Valve because in a lot of people's minds, Half-Life 2 was just the more fun game.
Epic Games was developing a new arena shooter back in 2014, but completely switched focus to work on this upcoming third-person shooter. How long would Epic Games have been in business if they hadn't abandoned Unreal Tournament for Fortnite?
But Fortnite wasn't a guaranteed success for Epic. The thing that Fortnite is most well known for now, the Battle Royale mode, wasn't even in the game at launch. It was a side mode that just completely exploded in popularity. The focus for Fortnite's early development was save the world, and it just didn't click with a lot of people. And Epic didn't need to abandon Unreal Tournament for either in order to make a profit. Yes, Fortnite made more money, but it was an unprecedented amount of money. The kind of profits only Activision or Blizzard could hold a candle to. The community was still there for Unreal Tournament 4. They could have easily allocated at least some of their resources to still work with the community on the project. Or, at least keep some of the games available for people.
Quake 3 was a big hit, but it took like 9 years for a sequel to come out.
Is Quake 4 really even a sequel to Quake 3? Like genuinely, even if its multiplayer was pretty similar, it's more of a sequel to Quake 2 than anything else. Hell, the story takes place in the same universe and follows up directly on it. id Software didn't even develop it, that was Raven who did it. And even despite housing a small community of players, it just wasn't as popular as Quake 3's multiplayer scene.
But what about Doom 2016? That had an arena shooter multiplayer, and you're right, it was okay, but it also like really sucked ass. Like playing as demons in multiplayer and killing other players, that's what was cool about Doom 2016's multiplayer, and almost everything else kind of sucked ass. Especially all these, unforgivable dances.
Why are we so obsessed on the 2016 emotes? Seriously, the entire experience was hinging on whether or not it had stupid harmless dances in the game? And seriously, the demons were the only good thing about 2016's multiplayer? No. You know what was wrong with 2016's multiplayer? The weapon limit and some of the weapon balancing. That was it. The customization was great, the weapons felt fun to shoot, and the maps were genuinely really well designed. And I'm not the only one who especially thinks that last part. If you don't know, there's a multiplayer Doom mod called Quake Champions Doom Edition that essentially replicates the gameplay of Quake Champions in the Doom engine. And alongside it, it comes with a bunch of pre-packaged maps from Quake games and, you guessed it, Doom 2016's multiplayer. Excavation, Helix, the Chasm, no relation, are all featured in this mod and play just as well here as they did in 2016 multiplayer. And let's not even get into the maps that weren't featured in the mod. Orbital, Boneyard, Empyrean, Disposal, all of these maps are amazing, genuinely. I don't think there's a single map in 2016 multiplayer that I don't enjoy playing on. Saying that the demons were the only thing people enjoyed about 2016 multiplayer is just a flat out lie, and it's taking away from so many of the other genuinely really good things about it. Yes, again, it wasn't perfect, I already mentioned my issues with it, but treating it like the whole package sucked, even if it is just a joke, is just wrong if you ask me.
The multiplayer of Doom 2016 felt like it was checking a box, as 98% of the effort went towards the single player.
You know why else it feels that way? Because it was outsourced. id Software didn't even make it. It was Certain Affinity. Again, it's not a coincidence that opinions on the multiplayer started to lighten up the moment id got their hands back on it and made update 6.66. You even mentioned this fact back in your 2016 review. How could you not bring it up again here?
If you check the player count of the arena shooter genre on Steam, it's barely a fraction of what CSGO pulls in.
Now, I don't know if he just looked at the arena tag on Steam or something else, but so many of the games on this list just flat out do not fit the genre at all. Ultra Kill doesn't even have multiplayer, Project Nexus isn't an FPS at all, and like 4 of these are just Vampire Survivor ripoffs. The majority of the rest of these just aren't FPS games at all, let alone arena shooters. How hard is it to get a consistent list of actual arena shooters on Steam?
Splitgate might be the best example of a comeback, but that comeback was short-lived and its player base has evaporated since. Though the studio is working on a sequel, the reason Splitgate even saw this level of success as a pure arena shooter was due to its incredible portal gimmick, and movement and aiming was much more accessible to newcomers. This was adapting to trends.
Splitgate is not an arena shooter, it is a movement shooter. Bringing this game up as an example of an arena shooter even contradicts your own definition earlier of what an arena shooter is when you mention that arena shooters have no weapon limit, and Splitgate has your standard 2-weapon limit.
These games often had a weapon wheel or allowed players to hold every single weapon in the game at once. No 2-weapon system to speak of.
And maybe this is just my experience, but the portal gimmick of Splitgate did not feel any more welcoming compared to any other movement shooters out there. In fact, I feel it was less welcoming. I had no idea how to use the portals efficiently at first, and that was a part of the learning curve. And that's not the game's fault, but saying that it's somehow more accessible than other movement shooters out there is just a lie.
It seems the best way of bringing back arena shooters was through fun, easy to understand movement tech like grappling hooks. And what do you know? This feature has been universally praised and beloved in Doom Eternal, Halo Infinite, and Titanfall 2.
Why are we acting like grappling hooks in shooters are a new thing, be it single player or multiplayer? Just look at 3-Wave CTF, one of, if not the most popular Quake multiplayer mods of its time, boasting a number of power-ups and a grapple hook to enhance movement even more. It was so popular that when Zoid, the creator of the mod, attempted to change his servers back to regular deathmatch, all the people on there just complained and whined until he put it back onto the CTF mod. id Software themselves even helped with development on the mod with how popular it was. Grapple hooks are not a new concept for shooters, they just aren't.
This is why we saw trends of offering rewards to bad players. with things like death streaks in Modern Warfare 2, ordnance drops in Halo 4, Titans in Titanfall. Everybody gets a Titan, no matter how poorly you do.
Even if cases can be made for the first two, getting a Titan in Titanfall does not guarantee you kills or even winning the game for that matter. Skilled pilots have the tools and are just as capable of taking down a Titan as they are obtaining one. Your success as a Titan relies not only on fending off pilots or any other thing that can get in the way of trying to blow it up, but also on your know-how to play whatever Titan you are playing as, be it Rowan or Ion or whatever.
So what happened to arena shooters? Gatekeeping happened. Quakers want you to follow jank written guides on how to perform basic movement because things like bunny hopping and rocket jumping aren't explained in the games, and never had intuitive control systems implemented that made those actions easier. Shooting at a blur darting across a CRT monitor with a ball mouse while compensating for 200 millisecond lag isn't very engaging for hours either. And by the time technology caught up with the genre, taste in multiplayer had long changed.
I don't like using the term skill issue because frankly the most annoying people on the planet tend to use that term, but this post is really the equivalent of that. First off, just who is gatekeeping these games? Am I missing something? I've genuinely encountered nothing but nice people in the arena shooter community. Whatever bad apples there are outnumbered by the sheer amount of passionate, great people to speak to. I remember when Gianni started playing Fraggy Fridays, even just throughout the week, I saw so many people in the middle of matches go out of their way to teach new players how to play and how to succeed. That sounds far from gatekeeping for me. And even then, learning movement tech is not as complicated as this guy makes it out to be. Anyone can do it. You want to B-hop? Just keep hitting the spacebar as you keep hitting the ground as you move. You want to crouch slide? Just crouch the moment you hit the floor. You want to rocket jump?
You acquire a rocket launcher, fucking shoot yourself, and trade off one rocket plus your health for a brief boost in mobility.
It's easy to do all of these things. The challenge comes from using it in the right situation and using it to your best advantage. That's the learning curve. And what do you mean by intuitive control schemes? You can rebuy nearly anything on this. Do you just want a button where you can rocket jump just instantly? You're not going to be given success on a silver platter instantly, and that goes for any game ever. To quote Jake the dog,
"Sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something."
You will never be a perfect player. You will suck early on, you will die a lot, but that's a part of the learning experience. We all suck when we start out. The fun comes from sticking through it to the end and learning as much as you can and getting better every match you play. That's the addiction of arena shooters. That's why they work so well even to this day. Even with all the flaws Quake Champions has, that's why you saw so many people asking, where has this game been all my life when they finally touched it? I do agree that these games should do a better job of teaching the players these things. Hell, Quake Champions doesn't even have a tutorial anymore, it's just a bunch of text. But again, it's not hard at all to do these certain texts on their very basic level. If this forum post wasn't for an arena shooter and instead for a fighting game, it would be easy bait to be put on something like Scrub Quotes.
In short, the movement of games like Quake are what made arena shooters great, but it's also what made it impossible to grow because it was inaccessible to newcomers.
This is the whole crux of the argument that I just don't agree with. The argument that arena shooters needed to evolve and yet they somehow didn't, when really, in reality, it's the opposite. Isn't it funny how not once throughout this whole video, the main thing that made Quake Champions so divisive wasn't even mentioned? The champions themselves? By your logic, that should make it succeed, right? That's making it accessible for the modern era. But no, that's not what happened at all. And in fact, it pleased no one. It alienated veterans and it just made the newcomers all the more confused. Combine this with the awful microtransaction system and terrible use of the early access formula, that is what effectively killed Quake Champions' chances at success. The desire to please everyone, to have their cake and eat it too. And in turn, they only ended up pleasing a very small crowd.
I feel like maybe there's hope, but to be honest, I'm not sure if there's an arena shooter that could interest me at this point. Whatever chance there might have been for arena shooters to make a comeback and return, it most likely died with Doom Eternal. But if anyone can bring back the intense, fast-paced action of arena shooters and revive the genre, it's gonna be Doom.
But why is Doom the only one that can bring it back? Even though you say that you're sad that it's gone, it just makes it sound like that there's no chance for them to come back, which isn't true at all. Like I said, if id's next game is a Quake game, why can't that be the one to bring it back? All you're doing is just discouraging them. Some people were questioning why he didn't bring up any New Blood games at all or anything else from the indie sphere when talking about arena shooters, and in a way I sorta get it, because those games are indeed single player only, even though he still talked about a lot of single player only games in this video, or games that were known for its single play. But at the same time, I would have still brought it up, but for a different reason. Because like I mentioned in my original video, these games are more popular than they have been in years. 7 years ago, making a retro-styled shooter was seen as suicidal. People would assume it would not work. Really, arena shooters are not in that much different of a position right now. What we need are not only competent developers confident in their vision and not willing to compromise it just to reach a broader audience, but again, everyone making sure that their voice is heard to tell the industry that we want this kind of thing right now in a sea of so many samey multiplayer games. That's all I have to say regarding the video, but I do just want to end this video with one final note. I'm not trying to shame Actman or anything for even trying to tackle this topic in the first place. Quite frankly, we need all the attention we can get, and I welcome that attention. But if you're going to talk about this subject, you need to do it right, and unfortunately, this was not done right. And especially if you're not as familiar with this genre like some others are, like I would assume Actman tends to be, it wouldn't hurt to ask some people for help, and I don't understand why he just stuck to the standard Google Wikipedia searching most likely instead of just asking people knowledgeable in the subject for help. And at the end of the day, I think really what's ironic about all this is that the fact that so many people are outcrying against this video and saying what they are really just proves all the more that there's still an audience for these games and that people still really care about them. Of course, we shouldn't be ultra hostile or anything, we should still fairly critique at the end of the day, but again, it's proof that there is hope for the genre, and that his points are just not right. If you made it this far, I do hope you enjoyed my analysis of this whole thing. This ended up being way longer than I was expecting it to be. I should have another video out hopefully pretty soon, although no guarantees as always. I know there was a bit of a wait between the Arena Shooter video and then the Hi-Fi Rush video, but hopefully the gap should be closed on that with the next video I make. So yeah. So other than that, have a great night guys, and bye.
I'm gonna